All right, this is the second half of Matthew chapter 5. So, this whole section is the six antitheses. So they are six misinterpretations of Scripture, right? So if Jesus is coming as part of this new covenant to write the law on our hearts, basically what he's trying to say is this is the way the Pharisees interpreted it. What it should really be if it's written on your heart is something different. So you've heard it said, this first verse, there you go, to our ancestors said, do not murder, right? So is there some isolated technical uh, law that you have to make sure you don't commit that act to be murder? Or is he trying to say, hey, by the way, what is in your heart that would lead to murder? Right. So instead of saying the technical act is what we need to worry about, what he's saying is what is the condition of your heart, right? If you're angry with your brothers and sisters to the point where you could get to murder, clearly there's an issue before you even get to that act, right? That disobedience, that rebellion to the way God would like you to act and would hope for your heart to be, if you have Jesus as your Lord and he is ordering your ways, you shouldn't get to that point, right? So he goes on and says, hey, by the way, this is how you would sort that out. And your heart should be different than that, right? You shouldn't be in that sort of situation. So it continues on for adultery. Same thing. You've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But what I'm saying is, what is your heart condition, right? If you're looking lustfully at women already, like that you already have a heart condition that is not appropriate because it could lead to the act that was outlawed, right? So it says you'd be better off to chop off your hand or poke out your eye, right? Basically, what it's saying is the heart condition is what Jesus is looking at, as opposed to a technical act of this or that or another one, right? Third one, although it's short here, can be a big one for people, obviously. Um, Whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce, right? That's Deuteronomy 24:1. Uh, I won't make this whole thing about divorce, but if you want to do some searching, want to look at some things in Deuteronomy 24:1, basically, um, it says that if your wife loses your favor by, and it's actually a vague wording. It just says doing something indecent or being indecent. And typically that word is related to nakedness, shame for sexual things, stuff like that. Um, so it would lead it to being probably inappropriateness, right? Immorality. But it doesn't quite lock it down in the language anyways. So the Pharisees and other peoples expanded that to the point where it said, if they burn your food at night, then that's losing your favor, and that is not worth it, right? I think it's later in Matthew, um, where it talks about like the Pharisees basically, Jesus repeats this and says, only in sexual immorality can you have a divorce. And the Pharisees are like, well, if that's the rules, you're better off not getting married at all because, you actually have to stay married. So you can see they had drastically different standards at that time. So Jesus is coming back to saying, hey, by the way, in that account, that's Matthew 19. He actually brings up creation and says, hey, these people are put together as part of creation, so you shouldn't be tearing that apart. So it's a serious issue if you do. Right. So if you, like I said, want to do a bit more study in Mark 10:5-11, Luke 16:18, it seems to appear that there are no grounds for divorce in the way that it's worded. But clearly Jesus says there is here. So I think that's just sort of like, that's the rule. Like an example people use sometimes is this is the speed limit. But if a policeman or a um, ambulance speeds, it's not illegal for them to speed because they are allowed to do that in those situations. So the same type of thing, divorce is not part of the common process, but there are extenuating circumstances that Jesus lays out here. The only other condition explicitly laid out is in 1 Corinthians 7. verses 10 and 11. Some people call it the abandonment clause, where Paul pretty clearly says if your husband or wife is a non-believer and they abandon you, they are trying to leave, then wipe the dust from your feet and let them go. So different churches and pastors and whatever have sort of looked at that. What does abandonment mean? So if they are abusive in other ways, would that be considered abandonment? Um, it's pretty clear that if they are a non-believer and they are violating the covenant, particularly if they want a divorce, then let them walk. Um, if you are both believers, then according to Jesus, you should be working those things out. If it is not sexual immorality. So obviously, there's lots of complicated situations. I'm not trying to wade in on all of those. I'm not trying to wade in on the 78 million probably books that have been written on this. I'm telling you the scriptures to look for and what's in the Bible. And that's what's in there. So you see from there, he goes on to telling the truth, right? And that one is sort of about oath taking. The Jews of that time had a practice of they would say that they're sort of swearing to God that they're going to do something, but they couldn't say God, so it made it sort of sketchy, and that you could say certain things. And basically, he's just like, don't do all of that nonsense, right? Make your word be your word. If yes is yes, no means no, and just go that way. The second mile here is you've heard it said there was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And basically what Jesus is laying out there, the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, I think was probably being taken as a personal thing, right? Vengeance. If somebody takes your eye, then you go off and get their eye. That is not how that was written. That was a legal framework, right, for justice and righteousness. So for the courts to say the punishment should fit the crime, right? If you did something that was small, there are penalties coming into the next one, or even no, this one. If someone slaps you on your cheek, there are actually penalties involved for how hard they hit you. If they knock out a tooth, it's worse, whatever, right? So the penalty should fit the crime. So in this case, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, it was actually worse to slap on the right cheek than the left. And it says, turn them the other way. If they want to take your shirt, that's your undershirt, you could be sued and lose your undershirt. But you cannot be sued for your coat. Your coat is considered sort of like your primary residence nowadays or something like that, right? So you can't sue someone for their coat. So that's what that expression means. If they want to sue to take away your shirt, let them have your coat, right? Again, what this gets you down to is your heart condition. The Pharisees had built up this ethos of you can get back at people. Retribution is okay. And he's saying, in your heart, that can't be the case. You can't have a heart of retribution and vengeance. That is not what you're asking for. Now, does that mean you cannot protect yourself? No, because that leads into the next one too. That doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. It just means you should not have a heart of vengeance. It shouldn't be, I'm going to get you back for what you did to me. That's the heart condition that God is looking for. So, and the last one, love your enemies. So we've gone over this one in church a couple of times. So you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So that was sort of an addition by the Pharisees, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. So if you read through that, what does it say for love? He tells you three specific things: love them, pray for them, greet them, right? Like I said, we had a sermon on it not too long ago, but I think it's important to note, what does it mean by love, right? We have this squishy thing that we sort of, you should be emotionally loving them. But it is love in Leviticus 19:17 to rebuke others. That is loving to rebuke others. All through John, it is loving to tell people the truth, right? Even defending the weak from violence or unrighteousness is loving your neighbor, right? That is loving in order to defend someone who is weak, to actually physically be violent against someone else who's not, right? That is still loving. So when it says love your enemy, we talked about the verse in that that sermon, Romans 12:20, where if your enemy is hungry or thirsty, feed them. That's great. For doing so, you'll be heaping coals upon their head, right? So you need to still speak truth. You still need to rebuke people. You still need to confront evil in this world, despite the fact that you are loving them. And love is an action, right? Greet them, pray for them, feed them, give them food if they need it. Continue to have the heart that isn't, out for vengeance or retribution because they're evil. You're not trying to get them back, but you are going to be righteous. You're going to continue to fight for righteousness and justice as Jesus would want you to, right? So it's all about a heart condition. And that's what those six antitheses are, is sort of saying, hey, by the way, here's how these people have been interpreting it, and they're twisting the point, the whole purpose, right? The whole purpose of these commandments is to show you the type of heart you should have, and you're trying to get around them like they're legal obligations. What I want is to actually transform your heart, transform your way of thinking. Repentance, going back to our reading a few weeks ago, or last week, you're changing your heart. You're actually changing the way that you go about your daily business by transforming to the will of Jesus. And by doing that, you're going to fulfill the law, right? So it's not about the law. It's not about the technical requirements. It's about your heart condition. All right. That is it for chapter 5. Hope you enjoyed.